Hello and welcome to our Friday videos. This Friday we're wrapping up our natural resource economics discussion, and that is taking the form of kind of applying some of these big picture ideas that we've talked about as far as natural resources being used in the economy and looking at specific events that are going on in the real world. Excuse me. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Pebble Creek mine in Alaska, which is a proposed gold mine. Although when you're mining gold, you're usually targeting gold, but also getting other precious metals, copper, silver, other things that tend to be found in the same places you find gold. So this mine would be pulling up a lot of precious metal, and yeah, there are proponents of it. It's a Canadian company leading the project. It was largely shot down under the Obama administration. Under the Trump administration, it's gotten kind of new life. And the article that I had you read expressed some uncertainty, or even it looked like maybe the Trump administration was going to pull the cord on it and not grant it permits that it would need to be developed. It has unfolded in the last week or two. The Trump administration didn't pull the cord on it. What they did was basically you're sending it back to Alaska and saying that Alaska state regulators are going to have the final word on whether this is going to go forward or not, looking at some specific issues. Alaska in general is in favor of the mine. The state of Alaska is, although there are, of course, groups within Alaska who are very strongly opposed to it. I have one of my brother's in-laws has some fishing rights to fish for sockeye salmon in this watershed in the Bristol Bay area. So every summer he goes up and harvests salmon, sells it to processors. He harvests something like 100 tons of salmon in a summer. So he's the sort of person who is very opinionated about something like the Pebble Mine, because one of the things that is likely to happen if the mine is developed, it requires moving a lot of earth to get at the precious metals. And moving that much earth, you end up with a bunch of tailings. That's the stuff that you've kind of pulled out and you've sifted out the things you want, the stuff that's left over. Tailings inevitably have some stuff that's kind of nasty in it. And some of that is going to end up leaching into water. You can do things to prevent that, to stop the worst of it, but there's of course going to be some amount of that. And even if stuff that seems pretty benign, soil and rock, is released into the water in large amounts, that right there is enough to mess up something like a salmon fishery, where salmon really need clear water. They can't have water with a lot of sediment in it. That just doesn't work for them because of their biology. So what I'm going to do to kind of analyze this issue is, how would an economist approach something like this? And so the main tool we'll be using this semester is called cost-benefit analysis, and we'll talk a lot more about that going forward. But here, that's a good way to kind of structure how an economist is going to think about something like the Pebble Mine. So let's say Pebble Mine moving forward. Let's do a cost-benefit analysis of that. So what are the costs? What are the benefits? So I've got a whiteboard. We're going to write some costs and benefits of making the Pebble Mine. So the benefit of the Pebble Mine, we get gold, other precious metals. We get jobs. Those are the big benefits of going forward with the Pebble Mine. There's going to be stuff like tax revenue for the state. You know, they get a little cut royalty from stuff that's extracted, so they like that there would be jobs. They would like the tax revenue that comes in. You know, mining a bunch of this gold is obviously creating wealth that some of it will stay in the local economy, some of it will go to shareholders, etc. So we could put numbers on this if we spent time doing it. We could look at estimates of how much gold they think is there, how much they would be able to extract, what it would cost them to extract it. And so what we would look at is kind of the net amounts that you would make from something like Pebble Mine. So if you can get $100 million worth of gold, but it costs you 80 million to actually mine it, you're getting 20 million net from the gold, right? Now, the 80 million that you pay to mine it, some of that is going to things like labor, which we might actually care about in its own right because we're creating jobs, right? So those would be benefits of the Pebble Mine. And if we thought about this carefully and had the time and the information sources, we could put numbers on all of those. Now, what's going to be cost of if the Pebble Mine is developed? So I mentioned there's a concern that water quality is going to be affected. So that could harm sockeye salmon and the fishery that's really important for that area. It's actually important for a lot of us who like to eat salmon. This is one of the best places. It's the largest sockeye salmon fishery in the world. That water quality degradation might do some other things. So this is an area where we do have people coming in for tourism, come in on cruise ships or other methods and see the amazing nature in the area. So tourism might be harmed if water quality is lower. There might be fewer people who are interested in going to visit if the water isn't nice and clear, if the wildlife isn't as abundant. There might also be some harm to Native Alaskan traditions. So that's something else that's briefly mentioned in this article. So going ahead with this project, we might be harming some traditional ways of life for people that have been there for a really long time, doing that sort of stuff for a really long time. That's something we should think about. There are actually laws that say we have to think about that. So these are some costs and benefits of going forward with the Pebble Mine. So it's not totally surprising that someone like the president of Bass Pro Shops, a big sport equipment company, outdoor equipment company, put a lot of weight on this sort of the tourism recreation aspect of this beautiful natural area. That's really important. That's important to that business, right? The more people who want to go on trips to Alaska, the more people are going to go get outfitted at Bass Pro Shops. So not surprising that you get some outdoor groups, wildlife federations, but also some hunting sportsmen sort of associations lining up on the side of, maybe this isn't the right place for a mine. On the other hand, obviously the company that would be extracting this metal is very excited about this idea, but also you add in a lot of the local community supports it because of the jobs that it would bring in. And the state cares a lot about adding these jobs and also the tax revenue that they could get to it. So this is a way to kind of think about what kind of cost and benefits would come from a natural resource extraction project like this. We actually see natural resources on both sides. We see trade-offs between salmon and gold. And it helps us make sense of the controversy that we see in permitting approval for something like this, like is going on at the moment. I mentioned we could, relatively straightforward to put numbers on the benefits of going forward. We could also come up with numbers for these costs, right? We look at what the expected change in water quality would be because of the mine, and look at what scientists have estimated that would do to the salmon population, and look at how that population change would affect the salmon industry in the area. We could put numbers on that, both for salmon and tourism. It's going to be tricky to put some numbers on how changes to Native Alaskan traditions, how that's going to affect people. Those are things that are not traded on markets, right? There's no market for buying, centuries-long way of life and things that are handed down, indigenous knowledge, things like that. So those are things that if we're going to try to put a number on that to stack it up against these other numbers, that's going to be a little bit tricky. That's something we'll talk more about in the class as well. So that is our Pebble Mine, thinking like an economist about what's going on with it. I will share in the next videos some of the other articles we read. Thanks.